Okay, good morning and happy Monday. I'm just looking down here and to confirm that it is the 19th of July. Okay, so this is the lesson that you'll see both in class and if you're isolating at home like me, that you'll be following at home. So we just need to give ourselves a few minutes to get ready. I'm hoping my lovely helpers, as always, have given out the pink books for us today and that we are ready with pen in hand to begin. Right, so we're just going to take a minute to write our title, Mastery Monday, session 25, and it is the 19th of July. Okay, so I'm really sorry not to be with you for our last week of lessons, but as you can see, I'm braving the camera to give you a sense that I'm absolutely with you and wishing that I could be with you in person. So we are looking at Mastery Monday, session 25, the Fantasy Quest. So you can just press pause if you need to, just while you get that down. Okay, guys, so we're going to do a little bit of recap work before we finish our Fantasy Quest stories today. So I'm just going to talk you through some recap, then you're going to apply it, okay? And then we're going to build up to finishing our Fantasy Quest. So, first of all, if you begin a sentence with a part that tells you when or where, then that is when you must use a comma. Okay, so when do we use a comma? Brilliant. When the sentence begins with the when or where. If the part that tells you when or where, though, is at the end of the sentence, then you don't use a comma. Okay, so there's a few examples here, possible examples for a fantasy quest that we were working on when my dragon is getting ready to attack. So here we go, for only a few moments. So that's telling me when and how long. For only a few moments, the dragon held her breath. Now, if you look, you can see that because we've got the comma there, because the bit telling us when is at the start of the sentence. So when did the dragon hold her breath? For a few moments. Okay, brilliant. Now, we can just reverse that structure and we can begin our sentence. The dragon held her breath for only a few moments. But as soon as we make that change, as soon as the information that's telling us when or where is at the end, we don't need that comma. We don't need that demarcation. So, recap, say it after me, okay? If you begin with what part? Brilliant, the when or where. So if you begin with the when or where, you use a comma. If the part that tells you when or where is at the end, you don't use a comma. Now we're going to put that into practice. We have got some sentences here, 4 of them. Now they do tell us when or where, and that information in some of these sentences are coming at the beginning, and in some of the sentences it's coming at the end. So your job is to copy and correct the sentences using commas correctly. Okay, now if I just read them as I'm reading, you can already be thinking, well, where is the part of the sentence that tells me when or when? If it's at the beginning, then I need that comma. If it's at the end, then I don't. So after the sun had gone down, the children headed back home. Okay, guys, so which part of that sentence is telling us when or where the action is taking place? Brilliant. What did you say? Excellent. So there it is, after the sun had gone down. So that's telling us when. So that's where we would put our comma. Now, I'm not going to help you out with the other ones. Okay, I'm going to read them to you, and I'm going to ask whoever is with you in the room to pause and give you no longer really than 5 minutes, okay, to get this done, to get these commas in the correct place. Are you ready? Number 2, in the afternoon, Jamie had a nap. 3, he watched television in the living room. So remember, this information can tell us when or where something is happening. The important question to ask yourself is that information of when and where at the beginning or the end? 4, as Jane walked to the shop, it began to rain. So guys, press pause. Our lovely adult that's with you in the room helping me out. Give yourself about 4 or 5 minutes. Now, I know some of us work at different speeds. You will be super duper successful and awesome and brilliant if you get all 4 done. I would love to encourage you, though, some of my writers that take a little bit more time, get 2 done for me. Definitely try and make it to 1 and 2. Okay, off you go. Press pause. Okay, let's see if you were right. Let's just magically move this on. Ooh, look, can you see the subtle difference? Some commas have appeared in right places. So if we look at number 1, we did have a little clue because I gave us We asked the question, didn't we? That information after the sun had gone down is telling us when. And it's at the beginning of the sentence. So if you've got your comma there, give yourself a tick. That's absolutely correct because we're separating the information at the start of the sentence. In the same way, look at number 2. In the afternoon, Jamie had a nap. When did Jamie have a nap? Yes, in the afternoon. So we put our comma in there and we've got that moment of demarcation, that separation. He watched television in the living room. Where did he watch television? Yes, in the living room. But because that information is at the end of the sentence, we don't need the comma. Brilliant. And last but not least, number 4. As Jane walked to the shop, it began to rain. Oh, so where was Jane when it began to rain? Or when was Jane? As she was walking to the shop. Brilliant. And because it's at the beginning of the sentence, there's our correctly placed comma between shop and it. So you could get a mark out of 4 for that activity. Brilliant. We're going to recap some of the other rules and go through a similar process. But what I want is just take a moment to do before we move on to a new rule is just to quickly explain to your teacher in the room. So by putting your hand up, or you can make a note of it in your book if you're working from home, or you can turn and tell your partner. But what's the rule that we've just recapped there? So when do we use a comma? And when don't we use a comma? So just pause, give yourself 30 seconds either to put hands up and tell miss, or you can turn and tell your neighbour, or if you're at home, you can just make a little note in your book. Okay, based on this rule we've just practiced, we use a comma when, and we don't use it if. So, time to talk, go. Right, do you have the time to talk? Brilliant. So, what's our answer? You use a comma, good, when the part that tells you when or where is at the start of the sentence. You don't use a comma if the part that tells you when and when is at the end. Brilliant. Okay, another bit to recap. Now, this is about information in a sentence that tells you if, although, or because. So if a part of the sentence, if a clause begins, if, although, or because, and it's at the start of the sentence, we put the comma after it. Now, if the part of the sentence that begins if, although, or because is at the end of the sentence, you don't need a comma. So here we go. Now we've moved on. The dragon's squared up to Alex, and Alex has been injured. And Alex, because his ribs were broken and bruised, Alex had to crawl to safety. Now, there's my part beginning with because. It's at the start of the sentence, so I need that comma to show that demarcation, that separation. Brilliant. Now here we've got it. Alex had to crawl to safety because his ribs were broken and bruised. Now because is at the end of the sentence, we don't need that comma. Now guys, as writers, we sometimes get to make these choices. Which sentence structure do you prefer the sound of? Now, sometimes we can talk about cause and effect. His ribs were broken and bruised, which is the reason why Alex had to crawl to safety, maybe. Or it gets us thinking that, that's a really difficult moment for Alex. So sometimes leading with the cause, the broken and bruised ribs, can be a good writing choice. You can always make those decisions and decide for yourself. But it's lovely when you write to have that variety. Some sentences with the because, if, although at the beginning, some at the end. Now we're going to practice. So we've got 4 sentences. So in a minute, I'm going to ask your teacher to pause. Now again, I'm going to suggest the same thing. We absolutely want to do 2. If we make it to 3, that's better than 2. And if you make it to 4, you're super duper fabulous, wonderful. Okay, so what are we doing with these sentences? We're looking for the part of the sentence that begins because, if, and although. And if that part is at the start of the sentence, we use the comma. And if it's not at the start of the sentence, we don't. So, lovely people in the room, if we could get a pause on the screen so our students have enough time to do this. See you on the other side. Right, so hopefully you were paused and given enough time to do it. Now let's look at number 1. Because the dog felt threatened, it began to growl. So there's my because word, and it's right at the start of the sentence. So I absolutely need my comma to separate those 2 ideas, those 2 parts of the idea, those 2 clauses. Gerald waited patiently because he did not want to seem rude. So we can see that because, say that quickly, because is in the middle of the sentence, we don't use the comma. Okay, now let's look at number 3. Although it was not dark yet. The moon shone in the sky. So guys, here we have our although at the beginning of the sentence. Brilliant. So we have to have the comma in place. Wonderful, okay? And if they want to go out, they must tidy their room, because if was at the start of the sentence, there's our comma separating those two ideas. So give yourself a fabulous 4 out of 4 or 2 out of 2. Give yourself a quick score. And we're going to just, again, pens down. We're going to either tell Miss, tell somebody next to you, or tell yourself at home in your own words what that rule was. So in this instance, what shifted? You use a comma, you don't use a comma if. So in your own words, just recap the rule that we've just practiced, okay? So give yourself 30 seconds to either tell Miss or Sir, put your hands up and tell them what you've just learned. Turn to the person next to you, tell them really quickly what the rule is, or if you're at home, you can make a note of it. All right, so your 30 seconds starts now. Right, guys, I did a weird 30 seconds, but hopefully your teacher paused for you. So just as a quick recap then, when are we using a comma in this rule? We're using a comma. What was that? What words have to come at the start of the sentence to use the comma? Although, if, because. Brilliant. So if, although, because, if are at the start of the sentence, we use a comma. We don't use a comma if the part that begins because, if, and although is at the end. That's really cool. Okay, ready? Our third and final recap rule today. Now, this is the one we've been working a lot on. This is our nice comma splice. Yep, it's as cold as ice, this comma splice. So remember, we don't use a comma to join together two independent clauses. So if two ideas that make complete sense on their own are spliced together using a comma, that's bad. We just don't do it. Okay, we even call it a special name, don't we? We call it the comma splice. Now, we have to then be aware that these are grammatically wrong. They lose us fast forward to GCSE marks. Thinking even about today, they lose technical accuracy. They show a lack of control. So we have to be able to correct the comma splice. Now, if you remember, we've looked at our 3 ways to correct comma splices, and we've reminded of them here. So the easiest way is to create 2 separate sentences by using a full stop. So we take that comma and we make it a full stop. Okay, so we can use a full stop. Now, sometimes you can use words like because, if, although to turn one clause into a subordinate, or you can use a semicolon. So we've got 3 options to apply to our next group of sentences. Okay, are you ready? So we have got 3, it says 4 there, we're meant to, should be 3. There should be 3 sentences, or have I lost a sentence? Who knows? Just do the sentences on the board. So we've got 3 sentences. Now I can tell you the short answer, yes, they've all got comma splices. So your job is to decide how you're going to fix those comma splices. Are you going to use a full stop? Yeah, to create separate sentences. Are you going to use a semicolon, or are you going to create a subordinate clause using a because, if, although, one of those keywords? So I'm going to ask your lovely teacher in the room in a minute to press pause. Okay, and our sentences are: Ria ran home as quickly as possible. She knew her mum had exciting news. Holding the cup in his hand, he gestured for another drink. He was feeling very thirsty. All afternoon, Joseph had been waiting for Sam to get home. He had missed her greatly. Oh no. Pause. Okay, so you may or may have not noticed, depending how eagle-eyed you were, I've just quickly switched the slides. They were in the wrong order. I'd already given away some of the answers. So, forgive me. So let's look at these sentences that we need to correct. So number 1, Ria ran home as quickly as possible. She knew her mum had some exciting news. Holding the cup in his hand, he gestured for another drink. He was feeling very thirsty. All afternoon, Joseph had been waiting for Sam to get home. He'd missed her greatly. So we've got 3 sentences there, all of them with comma splices. So you need to decide where the comma splice is coming and how you're going to fix it. So lovely teacher in the room, if you could press pause, give them about 4 or 5 minutes for this one. Thank you. Okay, so I've gone for the full stop answers, but when we get to those full stops, obviously we can explore some different options. So Ria ran home as quickly as possible, full stop. She knew her mum had some exciting news. Now we could have used a semicolon or a because. Ria ran home as quickly as possible because she knew her mum had some exciting news. Okay, lovely. Holding the cup in his hand, he gestured for another drink. Now this one was designed to get you thinking, because this is where the comma, the other comma was. This is where we need to create the two sentences. He was feeling very thirsty. Holding the cup in his hand, if you'd have put that a full stop there, that first idea wouldn't have made sense, holding the cup in his hand. Okay, so that needed to stay as the comma. And all afternoon, again, we need that comma there because the bit that's telling us when is at the start of the sentence. Joseph had been waiting for Sam to get home, so there's our full stop. He had missed her greatly. Now, again, we could have made that full stop a semicolon or a because. All afternoon, Joseph had been waiting for Sam to get home because he'd missed her greatly. Holding the cup in his hand, he gestured for another drink because he was feeling very thirsty. So you can see for all of these, all three options work. So give yourself a mark out of 3. And brilliant. Now, so we've done our recap, guys. We've got ourselves comma ready. But actually what I want to create time for you to do today on our final Mastery Monday is to recap the rule first of all. And then we're going to look at doing our fantasy story. So you don't use a comma if. What's that called, that mistake, when you do use a comma in this way? And how can you correct it? So 30 seconds to tell Miss, the person next to you or somebody in the room, how you would explain this final rule. So your 30 seconds starts now. Go for it. Right, so you've had 30 seconds to tell Miss. So let's talk about this together. You don't use a comma if there are two independent clauses or two main ideas being working in an idea. You create a comma splice when you use a comma in that way. And how do we correct it? Create a full stop to create two separate sentences, use a semicolon, or create subordinate clauses, which is brilliant. Okay, so that's all our comma recaps. She says, hopefully, yes. Now we're going to finish your fantasy story. Now, in our books, I know we've got these in separate places, so there might be time today that you can rewrite it as a holistic piece, or you might be finishing your fight scene. You need to decide what you're doing in a minute, a bit of autonomy, a bit of independent kind of task setting based on our kind of checklist that's on the board here. So we've been working through our Mastery Mondays on creating a fantasy quest. We have a hero. Mine was Alex, remember, who was sent on a journey to find a great treasure. They were given a magical object to help them. They encountered a monster along the way, and we did some brilliant descriptions using the Smaug description from J.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit, the dragon description. So we've described the monster. We've explained where the monster is. We've set the scene and we've described them. Then we were using a fight scene. So our problem was the fight scene. We had to fight the monster maybe to reach the treasure, the object behind them. Now, we hadn't thought about our magical object within the bigger aspect of the fight scene. That might be something you want to think about today. And we're also going to get 3 just final end sentences to show the hero being rewarded. So in a minute, when I pause or when I finish, you're going to be able to look in your books to see which parts of the story you have to finish today. But I do want to remind you, we were doing this brilliant kind of like breakdown of a fight scene. We had a moment of engagement. Yep, so that's where our hero and our monster see each other and prepare to fight. So mine was a dragon and my character was Alex. He was spying on the dragon and he described the dragon as he could see it. Maybe half asleep, we said lazy and full of food. But then suddenly the dragon awakes and sees Alex and they square up to each other. Now, we've said then they begin to fight, but we didn't just want to say one line of fighting. We've looked last time that we were together at how do we break that down into stages. So they begin to fight. Then our hero is going to get knocked down, but he's going to show resilience and determination. He's going to get back up. So that could be a couple sentences in itself. There's a moment where our hero needs to stand apart. He's going to look at his wounds and and how he's been damaged. And we talked earlier about broken and bruised for my character, Alex. So again, that's going to give you another couple sentences. Now, when we looked at this, and we have planned this already, guys, so this is really a recap. You should have all these lovely notes in your book. It's in that moment when our hero is broken and bruised and breathing and finding it really difficult, the monster has a moment of arrogance. And this is where they expose their weakness. So a moment when the monster is what we might call showboating. So the monster is maybe saying mean things, insulting the wounded hero, claiming to be undefeatable. And in that moment, exposing their own weakness. So for me, my dragon's raised up and he's exposed his soft little underbelly, that part of him that's weak, or that she's exposed it. And that's when Alex takes his advantage. And if you remember, I drew that very bad drawing, bouncing off the rocks to attack, and then using his staff and bravery to defeat the monster. So I would love to encourage you today to enjoy the process, to enjoy writing your fight scene. Now, here's one that I've worked on with you and then a little bit by myself to give you an example of that fight scene. Okay, so we had, as the waterfall of gold coins began to trickle out from under Alex's feet, the dragon awoke and expelled a low rumble and ominous hiss. So that's that moment of engagement. She began to rise, unfurling black leathery wings that framed her arched back and rigid neck. Her amber eyes glowed and fixed upon the boy, so small, so insignificant. She didn't even notice that he'd gained purchase, digging his feet into the gold and steeling his body and his heart for the fight. Finally, the boy was ready, and he slowly, rhythmically began to beat his staff on the ground, moving inch by inch toward her. Orange and red flame, like a volcano's magma, began to spit and spew from her mouth, pouring out liquid fire that could flay skin from bones in an instant. In an instant, Alex raised his shield to block her fire. The heat of her fire warped the metal, but he was safe. So really, that's me. I've covered numbers 1, 2, and 3. My moment of engagement, the fight begins. And actually, there was a moment he was knocked down, but he's safe, so he's able to get back up. But then my story might go on to number 4, when actually he thinks he's safe, but he realizes that he's been wounded. Maybe he's burnt his arm, or that he's been broken his ribs and been bruised. And that's when he has to retreat. And then my monster, remember, he's going to have a moment of arrogance. So, guys, this is your opportunity to slow down now, to let Miss press pause. And you are going to write and enjoy the writing of your fight scene. And then finally, 3 sentences to simply bring it to a simple conclusion where the hero returns home triumphant. So we're going to really focus, though, on this powerful fight scene. So I'm going to leave mine up on the board here to help you, plus our 6 moments. If you imagine that each moment of that needs to be at least 1 or 2 sentences. Now, also within that, if you find that you've got it done, because some of you are writing quicker than others, I'm going to ask that you redraft it, which means that you start to put all the pieces of your story together in one place. And things like looking at your commas, looking at your full stops, using those rules that we've practiced about commas to make sure you're doing an amazing job. So guys, I really am sorry that I'm not with you for this week, but I know how good you are working on these stories and they're going to be joyous for me to read. So best work, best focus, best that you can do, and enjoy the fight. Enjoy writing the fight scene. They're always good. Thank you, Miss. You can, or sir, you feel free now just to press pause and to give them time to write.